In the shadowy corners of literary history stands a figure whose work continues to haunt our collective imagination over a century later. Before vampires sparkled in the sunlight or became teenage heartthrobs, there was one dark prince who defined the mythology for generations to come. Welcome to the extraordinary life and legacy of Bram Stoker, the brilliant mind behind Dracula, one of the most influential horror novels ever written. Born on November 8, 1847, in Clontarf, Ireland, Stoker's early life gave little indication that he would one day create a character who would become synonymous with terror. As a sickly child often confined to bed, young Bram found escape in books and stories. Those long hours of isolation and imagination would later fuel his creative vision. But Stoker was far more than just the creator of Count Dracula. He was a theater manager who worked closely with the legendary actor Henry Irving, a loving husband to Florence Balcom, who famously rejected Oscar Wilde's advances to marry Stoker, and a prolific writer who produced numerous other works that stand in the shadow of his vampire masterpiece. In the next 45 minutes, we'll journey through Victorian London's foggy streets, explore the real-life inspirations behind the world's most famous vampire, and uncover how a Dublin-born theatre manager created a character so powerful that he continues to stalk through our nightmares and popular culture to this day. From the forbidding Carpathian Mountains to the superstition-laden villages of Eastern Europe, from Stoker's meticulous research notes to his revolutionary storytelling techniques, we'll examine how Dracula tapped into the anxieties of the Victorian era while creating a monster that embodies our timeless fears. Whether you're a devoted horror fan or simply curious about the origins of vampire lore, join us as we pull back the curtain on the man who gave us the ultimate creature of the night. Music swells. This is the story of Bram Stoker, the master of Gothic horror who taught the world that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that appear most human. Bram Stoker, early life and career. Bram Stoker spent his early childhood bedridden due to an unknown illness, only making a full recovery when he started school at the age of 7. Reflecting on this period, he once wrote, "I was naturally thoughtful, and the leisure of long illness gave opportunity for many thoughts which were fruitful according to their kind in later years." His early education took place at Bective House, a private school run by Reverend William Woods. After regaining his health, Stoker experienced no further major illnesses and thrived physically. At Trinity College, Dublin, which he attended from 1864 to 1870, he excelled as an athlete, playing rugby and engaging in multiple sports. He graduated with a BA in 1870 and later obtained an MA in 1875. Though he later recalled earning honors in mathematics, historical records suggest this was a misremembered detail. Stoker held prominent positions at Trinity, serving as the auditor of the College Historical Society and president of the University Philosophical Society, the only student in the university's history to have held both roles. His first academic paper, Sensationalism in Fiction and Society, hinted at his future literary pursuits. Entry into theater and writing. While studying, Stoker developed an interest in theater, influenced by his friend Dr. Monsell. He began working as a theater critic for the Dublin Evening Mail, a newspaper co-owned by Gothic writer Sheridan Le Fanu. At a time when theater critics were not highly regarded, Stoker stood out for the depth and quality of his reviews. In December 1876, he wrote a glowing review of Henry Irving's Hamlet at the Theatre Royal in Dublin. Irving, impressed, invited Stoker to dinner at the Shelbourne Hotel, and the two formed a lasting friendship. Stoker was also drawn to fiction writing. His short story The Crystal Cup was published in London Society in 1872, followed by The Chain of Destiny in the Shamrock. Alongside his creative writing, he authored The Duties of Clerks of Petty Sessions in Ireland, published in 1879, a practical non-fiction guide that became a standard reference. Additionally, he was passionate about art and co-founded the Dublin Sketching Club in 1879. London and the Lyceum Theatre. In 1878, Stoker married Florence Balcom, a renowned beauty once courted by Oscar Wilde. Although Wilde was deeply hurt by Florence's choice, he and Stoker later reconnected, with Stoker even visiting Wilde in exile after his downfall. After marriage, Stoker and Florence moved to London, where he became acting manager and later business manager of the prestigious Lyceum Theatre, run by Henry Irving. Stoker dedicated 27 years to this role, working closely with one of the most celebrated actors of the era. His time at the Lyceum brought him into London's elite circles, where he met figures like James Abbott McNeill Whistler and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, to whom he was distantly related. On December 31, 1879, Stoker and Florence welcomed their only child, a son named Irving Noel Thornley Stoker. His loyalty to Henry Irving was profound, and his memoirs revealed a deep admiration he held for the actor. While managing Irving's theater, Stoker traveled extensively but never visited Eastern Europe, despite its significance in his most famous novel, Dracula. He found the United States particularly captivating, accompanying Irving on tours and even visiting the White House, where he met Presidents William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. He developed an appreciation for American culture, incorporating American characters, such as Quincy Morris, into his literary works. One of Stoker's personal highlights was meeting his literary idol, Walt Whitman. In 1872, he wrote an impassioned letter to Whitman, which some scholars have interpreted as an expression of deeply repressed emotions. Bram Stoker in Cruden Bay, a haven for creativity. Between 1892 and 1910, Bram Stoker frequently visited the picturesque village of Cruden Bay in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. These month-long retreats provided him with the solitude and inspiration necessary to craft some of his most significant literary works. His connection with Cruden Bay ran deep, as two of his novels, The Water's Mow, 1895, and The Mystery of the Sea, 1902, were directly set in the area. Stoker's most famous work, Dracula, also took shape during his stays in Cruden Bay. He began writing the novel in 1895 while residing at the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel, a historic establishment where his guest book signatures from 1894 and 1895 still exist. The nearby Slains Castle, a striking ruin perched on the cliffs overlooking the North Sea, is believed to have served as a visual reference for Castle Dracula. The castle's octagonal hall bears a remarkable resemblance to the octagonal chamber described in Dracula, reinforcing the idea that Stoker drew inspiration from its architecture and eerie ambience. Inspiration from Whitby and the writing of Dracula. Before his visits to Cruden Bay, Stoker had traveled to Whitby, England, in 1890, an experience that significantly influenced Dracula. While staying at a guest house on 6 Royal Crescent, he spent time conducting research at the local library on 7 Pier Road, now Quayside Fish and Chips. He was particularly intrigued by the history and maritime folklore of Whitby, and elements of the town found their way into Dracula's plot. In the novel, Count Dracula arrives in Whitby aboard the doomed ship Demeter, which runs aground during a storm. The vampire, disguised as a black dog, leaps ashore and ascends the 199 steps leading to St. Mary's Churchyard, in the shadow of the haunting Whitby Abbey ruins. This dramatic arrival remains one of the novel's most iconic scenes. Stoker began his literary career while serving as manager of the Lyceum Theatre and secretary to actor Henry Irving. His first novel, The Snake's Pass, 1890, was soon followed by Dracula, 1897. While working at the Daily Telegraph in London, he continued writing fiction, producing works such as The Lady of the Shroud, 1909, and The Lair of the White Worm, 1911. He also documented his experiences with Henry Irving in Personal Reminiscences of Henry Irving, 1906, which became a successful memoir. The research behind Dracula, fact and fiction. Stoker's fascination with Eastern European folklore played a crucial role in the development of Dracula. He had a chance encounter with Hungarian Jewish historian Armin Vambery, who shared dark tales of the Carpathian Mountains. Some scholars believe these stories influenced Stoker's depiction of Transylvania, though historian Elizabeth Miller has argued that there is no direct evidence connecting Vambery's stories to the character of Dracula. Stoker's novel was also linked to Vlad III Dracula, the infamous 15th-century Wallachian ruler known for his brutal tactics. The 1972 book In Search of Dracula by Radu Florescu and Raymond McNally proposed that Stoker based Count Dracula on Vlad the Impaler, but Miller's research indicates that Stoker only borrowed the name and scattered details from Romanian history. There is no mention of Vlad III in Stoker's extensive working notes. The making of a horror classic. Unlike conventional novels of its time, Dracula was structured as an epistolary novel, composed of diary entries, telegrams, letters, ship logs, and newspaper clippings. This approach added a sense of realism, a technique Stoker had refined through his work as a journalist. Upon its release in 1897, Dracula was viewed as a straightforward horror novel, yet over time, it evolved into a cultural and literary phenomenon. The novel tapped into universal fears and fantasies, cementing its place in popular culture. Literary historians categorize Dracula alongside Gothic horror classics like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which similarly employed multiple narrators to add layers of authenticity to the story. The Lost Manuscript and Stoker's Legacy. For decades, the original 541-page typescript of Dracula was thought to be lost. However, in the early 1980s, it was discovered in a barn in Pennsylvania. The document included numerous handwritten annotations, and intriguingly, the original title on the cover page read, "The Undead," with Stoker's name inscribed at the bottom. Tech mogul Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, later acquired the typescript, preserving a vital piece of literary history. Several locations likely influenced Stoker's vision of Dracula. Apart from Whitby and Cruden Bay, other sources of inspiration may have included a visit to Slains Castle, the crypts of St. Michan's Church in Dublin, and the novella Carmilla by Gothic writer Sheridan Le Fanu. Stoker's detailed research notes for Dracula are now housed at the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia. A facsimile edition of these notes was later published in 1998 by Elizabeth Miller and Robert Bisson, providing scholars and fans with insights into the creation of one of the greatest horror novels ever written. Bram Stoker at the London Library, the research behind Dracula. Bram Stoker was an avid researcher and a member of the prestigious London Library, where he conducted extensive studies for Dracula. The library housed an immense collection of books on history, folklore, mythology, and supernatural beliefs, which provided Stoker with the material necessary to shape his legendary vampire tale. In 2018, researchers at the London Library uncovered several books that had been part of Stoker's research process, still bearing his handwritten notes and marginalia. These annotations provided insight into his thought process, highlighting the meticulous effort he put into crafting the novel's historical and supernatural elements. His extensive research ensured that Dracula was not merely a work of fiction but an intricately detailed narrative rooted in real-world myths, legends, and historical references. The final years and death of Bram Stoker. Stoker's later years were marked by declining health, with a series of strokes affecting him in his final days. On April 20, 1912, he passed away at number 26 St. George's Square, London. His official cause of death was listed as locomotor ataxia, 6 months, a term commonly associated with tertiary syphilis, though the actual cause remains uncertain. Some biographers speculate that his relentless work ethic and stress contributed to his deteriorating health, while others believe he succumbed to an undiagnosed illness. After his passing, Stoker was cremated, and his ashes were placed in a display urn at Golders Green Crematorium in North London. His only son, Irving Noel Thornley Stoker, who passed away in 1961, had his ashes added to the same urn. Originally, there were plans to keep Stoker's ashes together with those of his wife, Florence Stoker, but after her death, her remains were instead scattered in the Gardens of Rest. Today, Stoker's ashes remain at Golders Green Crematorium, where visitors continue to pay tribute to the author of one of the most enduring horror stories ever written. Stoker's beliefs, philosophy, and ideals. Political views and Irish nationalism. Born and raised in Dublin, Ireland, Stoker was a Protestant and a member of the Church of Ireland. He was also an ardent political thinker, supporting the Liberal Party and taking a deep interest in Irish affairs. Despite his nationalist sentiments, Stoker believed in a peaceful resolution for Irish home rule rather than revolution or violence. Stoker was a monarchist who firmly supported Ireland's place within the British Empire. He admired Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, whom he knew personally, and endorsed his progressive reforms concerning Ireland. His political stance reflected a balance between national identity and loyalty to the British Crown, a perspective shared by many Irish intellectuals of his time. Scientific curiosity and the occult. A firm believer in progress and science, Stoker was fascinated by scientific advancements, particularly in medicine and psychology. His writings, particularly The Lady of the Shroud, 1909, contain early elements of science fiction, reflecting his interest in the intersection of science and the supernatural. Despite his interest in mysticism and the occult, Stoker remained skeptical of superstition and strongly opposed fraudulent practices. He was particularly intrigued by mesmerism, hypnosis, and its potential effects on the human mind, a theme subtly woven into Dracula. While he maintained friendships with J.W. Brodie Innes, a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and hired Pamela Coleman Smith, an artist associated with esoteric circles, there is no evidence that he ever officially joined the order himself. Freemasonry and secret societies. Like his employer and close friend Henry Irving, who was a dedicated Freemason, Stoker also became a Freemason. He was initiated into Buckingham and Chandos Lodge No. 1150 in February 1883, progressing to Master Mason on June 20, 1883. However, despite achieving this rank, Stoker was not particularly active in Masonic circles. His involvement in Freemasonry lasted only 6 years, and after moving to London, he ceased participation in Masonic activities altogether. Bram Stoker's posthumous legacy. Following his death, Bram Stoker's legacy only grew in stature. Dracula, which had been well received upon its publication in 1897, gained immense popularity in later years, leading to countless adaptations in film, television, and literature. His contributions to Gothic horror and supernatural fiction continue to influence modern horror writers, and his research-driven storytelling has inspired literary scholars for generations. Even after more than a century, Bram Stoker's influence endures, with Dracula remaining one of the most widely read and adapted horror novels in history. His final resting place at Golders Green Crematorium remains a site of pilgrimage for fans of Gothic literature, cementing his place as one of the most iconic figures in literary history. Florence Stoker and the first film adaptation. Following Bram Stoker's passing, his literary estate was managed by his widow, Florence Stoker, who played a crucial role in preserving and protecting his works. In 1914, she published Dracula's Guest and Other Weird Stories, a posthumous collection of her late husband's short stories, some of which were believed to have been originally intended for Dracula. The first film adaptation of Dracula came in 1922 with the release of F. W. Murnau's Nosferatu***. However, this unauthorized adaptation significantly altered key details, including renaming Count Dracula as Count Orlok, to evade copyright restrictions. Florence Stoker, realizing that the filmmakers had neither sought her permission nor compensated her, filed a lawsuit against them. Represented by the British Incorporated Society of Authors, she pursued legal action to have all copies of the film destroyed. The lawsuit dragged on for several years, and in July 1925, the court ruled in her favor. Despite this ruling, a single print of Nosferatu survived and became one of the most influential horror films of all time. It wasn't until 1931 that the first authorized adaptation of Dracula was released, with Universal Studios producing Todd Browning's Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi in the title role. This version cemented Dracula's place in cinematic history and established the vampire's now iconic cloak, accent, and eerie demeanor. Dacre Stoker and the continuing Dracula legacy. In the 21st century, Bram Stoker's descendants sought to reclaim creative control over Dracula, a novel whose copyright history had long been fraught with challenges. Dacre Stoker, a great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, collaborated with screenwriter Ian Holt to write a sequel that carried the Stoker name. In 2009, they published Dracula, the Undead, a sequel inspired by Bram Stoker's handwritten notes, as well as research into the original novel's excised characters and unused plotlines. This novel marked Dacre Stoker's debut as a writer and was an effort to reclaim the narrative surrounding the Dracula mythos. In 2012, Dacre Stoker worked alongside Dr. Elizabeth Miller, a leading Dracula scholar, to present a long-lost Dublin journal written by Bram Stoker. Preserved by Stoker's great-grandson, Noel Dobbs, the journal offered new insights into the author's early thoughts and inspirations. One particular entry described a boy catching flies in a bottle, which some scholars believe influenced the development of Renfield, the insect-eating, lunatic disciple of Count Dracula. Honoring Bram Stoker, commemorations and festivals. Bram Stoker's impact on literature and popular culture remains immense, with numerous honors and tributes celebrating his legacy. Google Doodle Tribute, 2012. On November 8, 2012, Google commemorated the 165th anniversary of Stoker's birth with a special Google Doodle on its homepage, featuring Dracula-inspired imagery. Bram Stoker Festival, Dublin. In his birthplace of Dublin, Ireland, an annual Bram Stoker Festival is held every October bank holiday weekend. The festival, organized by the Dublin City Council and the Bram Stoker Estate, features theatrical spectacles, literary panels, film screenings, family-friendly activities, and outdoor events, all celebrating his literary achievements and Gothic legacy. Today, Bram Stoker's influence endures, with Dracula continuing to inspire countless books, films, television series, and adaptations. From the shadowy ruins of Slains Castle to the bustling libraries where he conducted his research, his presence is still felt in the world of Gothic horror.